Chapter 1: The Paradox of Progress. In the distant future, the world had transformed under the weight of its own advancements. Societies dominated by a hyper-advanced form of socialism had embraced technology not just as a tool, but as a governing force. AI systems, sophisticated beyond any human intellect, now track the contributions of every individual, assigning value to each action and penalizing those who fail to give their share to society. Yet, this system, designed to ensure fairness, often contributed to those who manipulated it for their own gain, creating a new class of hidden parasites. Eldritch, the ageless wanderer with a curse of eternal life, found himself in this transformed world, navigating the complex web of modern civilization. He watched from the shadows as humanity struggled with its own creations. The very technology meant to liberate them, now shackling them in invisible chains. The world had changed, but the nature of exploitation remained the same, merely donning a new mask. On a cold, neon-lit night, Eldritch prowled the streets of what was once London, now a sprawling mega-city covered in digital billboards and holographic displays. His target was a high-ranking bureaucrat in the Department of Social Contribution. This man, while appearing to be a paragon of virtue to the public eye, was skimming resources meant for the underprivileged, ensuring his continual rise in power and comfort. Eldritch's approach was silent, a shadow amongst shadows. His centuries of existence had honed his abilities to near perfection. He watched as the bureaucrat left a lavish party, celebrating another successful quarter of resource allocation. The irony was not lost on Eldritch. The man celebrated the very success he had stolen from those he pretended to serve. The confrontation was swift. Eldritch cornered the man in an alley, a place stripped of the futuristic glow that bathed the city. Here the reality was stark, the shadows more truthful. He confronted the bureaucrat with his crimes, the man's face turning pale as he realized who, or what, had caught him. "You feed on the lifeblood of those you vow to protect," Eldritch whispered, his voice as cold as the night air. "You are more a vampire than I have ever been." Before the bureaucrat could plead, Eldritch fed, but his feeding was selective. He drained just enough to weaken, to punish, to remind the man of his mortality. He left the bureaucrat alive, a choice that was part of his code. Fear, Eldritch had learned, was sometimes a more effective tool than death. As Eldritch vanished into the mist that perpetually covered the lower levels of the city, he reflected on the state of the world. His existence, once cursed by his vampiric nature, now seemed almost a necessary balance to the new types of darkness that had emerged. In a world where the lines between giving and taking had blurred, where the mechanisms designed to promote equality were used to enforce disparity, Eldritch found a new purpose. He would continue to hunt, not just for blood, but for justice in his own ancient way. The future was a vast, evolving landscape, and Eldritch, with his unique perspective, saw both its marvels and its horrors. As the city slept under its digital blanket, one thing remained clear: the need for a predator in the darkness, one that hunted those who preyed on society, was more vital than ever. In this new age, Eldritch's eternal journey continued, a solitary figure walking a path bordered by light and shadow, forever caught in the eternal crossroads of his existence. Chapter 2: Conversations with Winter. In the vast solitude of his ancient, dimly lit chamber, hidden beneath the sprawling modern city, Eldritch stood facing a simple table on which rested an ornate mask. The mask was crafted from polished chrome, reflecting the sparse light with a cold brilliance. It was a relic of a bygone era, yet it harbored a silent witness to Eldritch's eternal journey. Eldritch began to speak, his voice echoing softly off the stone walls, a soliloquy aimed at the mask, but meant for his own tortured contemplation. "This world," Eldritch murmured, his tone a mix of disdain and sorrow, "has twisted the virtues of work and reward into a perverse dance. Those who toil, who pour their souls into the soil, the gears, the systems, they receive the crumbs of their own labour, while those who sit idle, cloaked in the guise of need, are granted the bounty of others' efforts." He paced slowly in front of the table, his steps measured, the sound a soft tap against the cold floor. It is a paradox of lethargy and need, where the hard-working learn to curb their efforts for fear of losing more than they gain. What incentive remains for a man to strive beyond mediocrity when his excess is seized and given to another who does nothing to deserve it? Stopping in front of the mask, Eldritch leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the chrome surface, as if trying to peer into the soul it once represented. "Winter, old friend, you saw the potential of human intellect, the heights it could achieve. You believed in the power of reason, the drive of ambition. Look now upon your legacy. See what has become of the world you once sought to elevate." The mask, named Winter after Eldritch's old friend, who was once celebrated as the most intelligent man on the planet, remained silent, a cold observer to its master's lament. Winter had been a visionary, a human whose brilliance was unrivaled, a mind that had once walked side by side with Eldritch through the centuries. Now all that remained was this chrome visage, an artifact housing memories of a past where effort and intellect were revered above all. Eldritch's hand reached out, fingertips brushing against the cool metal. The brightest minds now dim their light, lest they shine too brightly and draw the envy of the masses. We live in an age of suppressed brilliance, where mediocrity is rewarded and excellence is penalized. Is this the equality you dreamed of, Winter? A conformity that crushes the spirit? Turning away from the mask, Eldritch walked towards a large window that looked out over the city. The sprawling metropolis glowed beneath the night sky, a lattice of light and shadow. As he gazed out, the reflection of the mask appeared beside him in the glass, a ghostly reminder of his solitude. "You and I, we are relics of a different age, Winter. Perhaps this world is no longer ours to judge, but as long as I exist, as long as I breathe this eternal air, I cannot accept this perversion of justice. There must be a balance, a return to virtue." As Eldritch spoke these final words, his reflection merged with that of the mask in the window, symbolizing his bond with his long-lost friend and his commitment to the ideals they once shared. The scene faded, with Eldritch staring into the night, a sentinel observing the ever-changing, ever-stagnant world below, his resolve as unyielding as the mask of Winter. Chapter 3. The Rally of Dissent. In the new world order, where digital surveillance and AI-controlled governance dominated, a man rose to prominence, his voice echoing through the colossal screens at a public rally. His name was Gregory Holt, a politician whose charisma was only matched by his ambition for power. Dressed sharply, he stood on the grand stage, his every gesture amplified to the masses who had gathered in the heart of the city. "More controls, more redistribution," Gregory shouted, his voice booming across the speakers, stirring the crowd into a frenzy. "It is our duty to ensure that everyone has an equal chance at life, regardless of their effort or circumstances." Gregory had never known true hardship. His path was paved by privilege and political maneuvering. He was adept at playing the role of the people's champion on public stages. Yet behind the scenes, his policies tightened the noose around the working populace. His latest proposal was draconian yet simple: escalate the taxes on the working class, to subsidize those he deemed needy. No one should have more than another, even if they risk more and work harder, he proclaimed. The more you earn, the more you owe to society, to those who do not. As the crowd cheered, blinded by the veneer of equity Gregory painted, a solitary figure stood at the back of the stands. This figure wore a chrome mask, its surface reflecting the myriad of digital lights and the faces of the enraptured crowd. The masked man, Eldritch, listened intently, his age-old wisdom seen through the facade of benevolence that Gregory displayed. "What will you do?" Eldritch's voice rang out, clear and penetrating. "When there is no one left to work, when you have stripped them of their will to strive, what happens when you have drained them all, and there is no one left to feed your schemes?" The crowd turned, a ripple of murmurs spreading through as they sought the source of this dissenting voice. But by the time their eyes reached the spot where the masked figure stood, Eldritch had vanished, leaving behind a question that hung in the air, unsettling some of the listeners. Gregory, quick to regain control, laughed dismissively into the microphone. Another selfish voice, clinging to old ideals of individualism. We must think of the collective, not of the self. His words, skillfully delivered, swayed the crowd back into agreement, their cheers drowning out the lingering doubts. Yet, as Gregory basked in the adoration of his supporters, his gaze flickered to where Eldritch had stood, a trace of unease shadowing his features. The masked figure's question had struck a nerve, a reminder of the fragile foundation upon which his power was built. In the solitude of his hidden sanctum, Eldritch removed his chrome mask, reflecting on the events of the rally. The world he now inhabited was one of extreme control, where the essence of individual striving was being leached away in the guise of equality. He pondered the twisted morality of this new society, where the industrious were punished and the indolent rewarded. As Eldritch gazed out into the night, his resolve hardened. The battle was not just against a politician or a policy, it was a fight for the very spirit of humanity. The vampire knew that his journey was far from over. His role, not just to observe, but to influence, to remind the world of the value of individual will and the dangers of absolute power. The chapter closes with Eldritch donning his chrome mask once more, preparing to walk among the humans, not just as a silent observer, but as a catalyst for change, a defender of the principles he had cherished for centuries. Chapter 4. The Reflection of Power. In the quiet solitude of his ancient chamber, beneath the pulsing life of the modern city, Eldritch sat facing the chrome mask once again. The mask, named Winter, served as a repository for his thoughts, a silent confidant in his eternal existence. Tonight, the weight of his next decision pressed heavily upon him, and the conversation he imagined with Winter seemed more vital than ever. This man, Gregory, has become the epitome of parasitism, far surpassing anything I, as a literal vampire, have ever embodied. His charisma masks a dangerous agenda, one that siphons the will and labor of the many to feed the indolence of the few under the guise of equality. He paced the dimly lit room, each step echoing softly against the stone. If I were to eliminate him, another would simply rise in his place. The problem is systemic, a malignancy that has spread through the very fabric of society. How then, Winter, do I combat such a foe? The mask, its chrome surface gleaming faintly in the candlelight, offered no answers, but Eldritch continued, voicing his strategic musings into the quiet. To dismantle such a power, one must strike not at the figurehead, but at the foundation. Gregory's popularity is but a symptom of the public's desperation and disillusionment. If I can expose his true motives, perhaps the people themselves will reject him. Meanwhile, beyond the ancient walls of Eldritch's refuge, Gregory's influence continued to swell. Media broadcasts showed his every rally, where throngs of people chanted his name, heralding him as the savior they had been waiting for. His promises of radical equality and redistribution tapped into the deep-seated frustrations of a divided populace. With each passing day, his ascent to the pinnacle of national power seemed not just likely, but inevitable. Clips of Gregory speaking to massive crowds were interspersed with scenes of his opponents unable to muster credible arguments against his tidal wave of popular support. His rhetoric, skillfully delivered, painted a picture of a utopia within reach, just one election away. Back in his chamber, Eldritch's conversation with the mask grew more intense. "This is not mere politics, Winter. It is a chess game for the soul of a nation. If Gregory's vision comes to fruition under the banner of falsehoods and manipulation, the very essence of individual striving, the cornerstone of progress, will be obliterated." As the night deepened, Eldritch crafted his plan. He would not confront Gregory directly. Instead, he would work to subtly undermine the narrative being woven around him. Using his ancient knowledge and network, Eldritch would find evidence of Gregory's duplicity, expose his exploitation of the system he purported to reform. The chapter closes with Eldritch extinguishing the candles, leaving the room enshrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the city seeping through a high window. His figure, reflected briefly in the mask, was a fusion of the past and present, a vampire determined to protect a future where freedom and individual effort was still valued. Eldritch's path was set, a shadowy journey, not of blood, but of enlightenment, where the true vampire might not be the one with fangs, but the one who feeds on the spirit of a society. Chapter 5. The Shadow in Chrome. Months slipped into the flow of time like leaves on a river, and Gregory's ascent seemed unstoppable. Each rally was larger than the last. His speeches echoed through every corner of the country, reverberating in the heart of every home through digital broadcasts. His words, laced with the promise of utopia, captivated the weary masses. Gregory walked the streets, shaking hands with labourers, sympathising with the overworked office staff, and always he was met with adoration. Yet, in every crowd, at every event, there was a constant, uninvited guest. A figure dressed in nondescript attire, face obscured by a reflective chrome mask, was always there, watching, observing. This mysterious presence was Eldritch, who had taken to stalking Gregory like a spectre, haunting his every public appearance. He was a silent sentinel, his motives unknown to all but himself. As the political season intensified, Gregory's campaign gained momentum. With every speech about redistributing wealth from those who hoarded it to those who needed it, his popularity surged. His platform appealed to a populace exhausted by economic disparity, promising an end to their struggles. Yet, beneath the surface of this growing wave of support, there lurked a deeper, more calculated play. Eldritch, ever the strategist, knew that direct action against Gregory would be futile. It would only turn the man into a martyr and would likely install a successor who shared his views, perhaps even more radical. Instead, Eldritch needed a plan that was subtle yet impactful, a scheme that would unravel Gregory's narrative from within. Thinking back to his long-lost friend Winter, Eldritch pondered how the brilliant mind would have approached such a dilemma. Winter's intellect would have cut through the emotional fog with the precision of logic and evidence. Inspired, Eldritch decided to adopt a similar approach. He began gathering information, documenting every public promise Gregory made, tracing the web of his financial supporters, and connecting the dots between his political rhetoric and his actions behind the scenes. As Gregory's campaign reached its zenith, he was elected as the head of the state of England and the UK. His victory was celebrated in the streets, with crowds cheering for the dawn of a new era. But for Eldritch, this was the moment he had been preparing for. The stakes were higher now, and his plan needed to be executed flawlessly. The chapter closes on the night of Gregory's inauguration. The city is alive with celebration, the air thick with anticipation of change. High above the revelry, in a shadow-clad room, Eldritch stands before the chrome mask of winter, his reflection mingling with the cold metal. "Tonight, we set the stage for truth," Eldritch whispers to the mask, his voice a blend of resolve and regret. "For the good of all, this charade must end." Outside, the festivities continue, unaware of the machinations in the shadows. Eldritch turns from the mask and steps out into the night, ready to unleash a plan months in the making, a plan that could change the course of history. The chapter ends with the image of Eldritch disappearing into the crowd, a phantom ready to influence the fate of a nation. Chapter 6. The Turn of Power. Gregory stood it alone in his opulent office atop the government building, overlooking the sprawling city that now lay under his command. The walls, lined with portraits of past leaders, seemed to echo his triumphant whisper, "I did it. I am the most powerful person in Europe, soon the world." From the shadows, a voice countered, "Power is very overrated." Startled, Gregory spun around, shouting for his guards, but only silence answered. "Looks like they are on a break," Eldritch said, stepping from the darkness, the reflective chrome mask of winter obscuring his face. "People like you are dangerous," Eldritch continued, his voice calm, yet carrying an edge sharp as a knife. "If I had cut you down too early, others would have followed in your footsteps, creating a perpetual, never-ending line of parasites." Gregory, his face pale with fear, edged towards the door, but Eldritch was faster. He removed the mask, revealing his decaying, withered face, ancient as time itself. "There is none more parasitic than I," he declared, his eyes locking onto Gregory's. "None. Until today, that is." Before Gregory could react, Eldritch lunged forward, his fangs sinking deep into the man's neck. Gregory's screams filled the room, then subsided into a gurgling whisper as his body slumped in Eldritch's grasp. With a solemnity born of centuries, Eldritch then cut his own arm, letting his ancient, potent blood drip into Gregory's mouth. Moments later, Gregory's eyes fluttered open, now glowing with the crimson hue of vampirism. "As my child, you must obey me now," Eldritch stated firmly. "Let's talk about how we change things." Gregory, newly reborn and bewildered, nodded, his senses heightened, his perception of the world altered forever. He listened intently as Eldritch began to explain his philosophy, the doctrine of personal responsibility, and the significance of merit and contribution in society. "Eternal life grants us a unique perspective on human folly," Eldritch explained, his voice echoing around the room. "You sought to control and redistribute, to equalize outcomes regardless of input. But such actions stifle the very drive that pushes humanity to excel. You will learn, as I have, that true leadership is not about control, but about guidance, not about taking, but giving." Gregory, still reeling from his transformation, absorbed every word. The gravity of his new existence began to dawn on him, along with the realization of the vast, dark eternity that now stretched before him. Under Eldritch's tutelage, he would have to unlearn much of what he had preached and practiced. The chapter closes with Eldritch and Gregory looking out over the city, the dawn casting the first light on a new era. Change begins with understanding, and understanding with seeing the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Eldritch murmured, his gaze fixed on the horizon. With a new vampire, born from the ashes of his ambition, and a mentor as ancient as the curse of blood itself, Gregory faced a path fraught with challenges and revelations. Under Eldritch's guidance, his journey had just begun, to reshape not only himself, but perhaps the very fabric of the vampiric legacy. Chapter 7. Renaissance of Resolve. A year had passed since Gregory's transformation under the tutelage of Eldritch. The change in leadership style was not merely personal, but had profound implications on the fabric of society. Once a herald of redistribution and heavy taxation, Gregory now stood as a champion of productivity and incentive. His policies had shifted dramatically, from penalizing the industrious to rewarding them, fostering an environment where innovation and hard work were encouraged rather than suppressed. The results were nothing short of miraculous. The United Kingdom, under Gregory's revised leadership, flourished. Tax reforms were implemented that reduced the burden on the productive, allowing them more freedom to reinvest in their enterprises and communities. This, in turn, led to job creation, higher wages, and a more robust economy. Gregory also introduced new schemes aimed at those who previously produced nothing. These programs were not mere handouts, but initiatives designed to equip individuals with skills and opportunities to earn their own way. Vocational training programs, startup grants for small businesses, and incentives for companies to hire long-term, unemployed individuals were just a few of the measures put into place. The shift away from expansive governmental control allowed a breath of fresh entrepreneurial air to sweep through the nation. The country's GDP soared, unemployment rates dropped to historic lows, and a general sense of optimism pervaded the public consciousness. As the nation thrived, Eldritch stood once again before the chrome mask of winter in his secluded chamber. The mask, still as ever, reflected the faint light of the room back at him, a silent witness to the vampire's contemplations. "You see, old friend," Eldritch spoke softly to the mask, "I too can change things. Not perhaps to your level of intellect and influence, but change nonetheless. It was never about ruling or overpowering. It was about guiding and teaching. Gregory was a man consumed by his quest for power, yet through guidance, he has transformed not only himself, but also this nation." Eldritch paused, reflecting on the year that had passed. "You always believed in the power of reason, and the potential of humans to rise above their baser instincts." He continued, his hand lightly touching the cool surface of the mask. "Perhaps in some way, this has been my experiment in proving you right." Outside the confines of his ancient home, the streets buzzed with the vibrant energy of a society reborn. People went about their lives with a new vigor, unaware of the supernatural forces that had shifted their fate. As Eldritch looked on at the mask of his friend, a sense of accomplishment filled him. An accomplishment not of power or eternal life, but of having positively altered the course of human history, albeit from the shadows. The chapter, and the story, concludes with Eldritch turning away from the mask, his silhouette blending into the darkness of the room. His journey, like his existence, was far from over, but this chapter had shown that even those cursed with eternal night could bring about days of prosperity and light. This transformation of Gregory, and through him, the country, was a testament to Eldritch's deep-seated belief in potential and redemption, a belief that would continue to define his eternal vigil over humanity. Eldritch, The Purge of Paris. Chapter 1. Shadows over Paris. As the fires of revolution set Paris ablaze, Eldritch watched from the shadows, his centuries-old existence never having witnessed such raw human fervor. The city, a labyrinth of narrow alleys and grand boulevards, had become a stage for the struggle between liberty and death. Eldritch, though a creature of the night, found the revolutionary cries for equality echoing some of his deepest beliefs, those of justice and the right of all beings to self-determination. Within this chaotic new order, Eldritch encountered other supernatural beings, wraiths, witches, and creatures of folklore who had long thrived unnoticed alongside humanity. Like him, they were now threatened by the revolutionary guards, who lumped the aristocracy and these ancient beings together as enemies of the new republic. Realizing the need for a united front, Eldritch formed an unlikely alliance with these outcasts. Their first challenge came swiftly. A band of revolutionaries, fueled by paranoia and the thrill of the hunt, targeted what they believed to be a nest of aristocratic conspirators, but was, in fact, a haven for those of Eldritch's kind. As the mob gathered, Eldritch and his allies prepared to defend their sanctum. Using his age-old wisdom and the art of deception, Eldritch orchestrated a diversion, leading the mob on a wild chase through the catacombs beneath the city, away from the haven. The plan worked, but it was a temporary solution. As they returned to the safety of the shadows, Eldritch knew this was just the beginning. They needed a more sustainable plan. Chapter 2: The Covenant of Shadows. To combat the increasing threats, Eldritch proposed a bold plan, a covenant of shadows that would protect their kind and the innocent humans who were often caught in the crossfire. This alliance would use their unique abilities to influence key revolutionary leaders, steering them away from violence against the innocent. Eldritch's strategy involved subtle manipulations. A whispered rumor here, a strategically placed document there, all designed to sow seeds of doubt among the revolutionaries about their own leaders' integrity and to redirect their focus towards true justice. Eldritch also used his powers to protect those wrongly accused, helping them escape the city's ravenous guillotine. However, as their manipulation deepened, a rift grew within the group. Some, tired of centuries of hiding, wanted to use their powers more overtly to seize control. Eldritch, ever the philosopher, argued that such actions would only replace one tyrannical regime with another. He believed in influencing humanity, not dominating it. This philosophical conflict came to a head during a rescue mission to save a group of human intellectuals whose rational voices had been drowned out by the cries for blood. The mission was successful, but the debate that followed fractured the group. Chapter 3: Betrayal in the ranks. The fracture within the supernatural alliance became a chasm when one of their own, a vampire named Marcellus, betrayed them. Marcellus, believing that Eldritch's approach was too passive, revealed their operations to the revolutionary guards, hoping to strike a deal for his own safety. The guards, now armed with knowledge of the supernatural beings among them, launched a fierce crackdown. Eldritch and his allies found themselves hunted through the streets of Paris, their sanctuaries compromised. Amidst this betrayal and chaos, Eldritch's faith in his principles was severely tested. He was forced to confront the possibility that his non-domination philosophy might have put those he sought to protect in greater danger. However, in his heart, he knew that sacrificing their ethics for temporary safety would doom them to repeat humanity's mistakes. With few options left, Eldritch devised a desperate plan to expose Marcellus's treachery to the revolutionary leaders, showing them that it was he who had manipulated them all along. His hope was to turn their wrath against Marcellus and away from the innocent. Chapter 4: Revolution of the Night. Eldritch's plan required him to step directly into the lion's den, the Revolutionary Council itself. Disguised as a human, he presented evidence of Marcellus's betrayals, ingeniously framing it as an aristocratic plot to overthrow the revolution from within. The gambit was risky, but the council was convinced. Marcellus was apprehended, and the immediate threat to Eldritch and his allies was quelled. The council, now wary of internal threats, scaled back their witch hunt for supernatural beings, focusing instead on stabilizing the Republic. As Paris slowly recovered from its bloody purge, Eldritch and the remaining members of his covenant watched from the shadows. They had managed to protect many, both human and supernatural, but at great cost. The city was forever changed, and so were they. Eldritch stood once again before the Mask of Winter, reflecting on the events. You see, old friend, humanity's capacity for both greatness and horror knows no bounds. We must remain vigilant, guiding where we can, for the sake of all beings, mortal and immortal. As the dawn broke over the revolution-weary city, Eldritch disappeared into the maze of streets, his heart heavy but hopeful. The world was ever changing, and he, a creature of eternal night, would continue to influence its course, ever committed to the shadows from which he could watch, protect, and ponder. Eldritch, The Chronicles of Seclusion, Chapter 1. The Fall and the Ascent. As the once mighty Roman Empire crumbled into dust and chaos, Eldritch, a being cursed with eternal life, watched from the shadows. The fall of Rome was not just the end of an era, but the dawn of a darker age. Witnessing the descent of civilization into the Dark Ages, Eldritch sought refuge and solace in the remote Carpathian mountains, far from the maddening decline of human societies. His new home was a forbidding castle, hidden by dense forests and perpetual mists, a place as haunted and foreboding as his tormented soul. The locals, a superstitious folk, whispered tales of a dark figure that roamed the woods at night, a spectre of death in the guise of a man. They called him the Shadow of the Carpathians, never approaching the castle where the air was filled with the palpable scent of desolation. In this seclusion, Eldritch's days were spent in contemplation and his nights in haunting solitude. He pondered the philosophical dilemmas of his immortality, questioning the nature of his existence. Was he doomed to witness the decay of ages, or was there a purpose to his eternal life? One stormy night, as howling winds danced with the ancient trees around his castle, a knock echoed through the halls. A wandering knight, lost and desperate, sought shelter from the relentless storm. Eldritch, curious and starved for any connection, allowed him entry. The knight spoke of his quest to find and destroy a beast of the night, not realizing that the very creature he hunted now offered him refuge. This encounter marked the beginning of Eldritch's realization that the world would always fear him, and he must tread carefully in the realm of men. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Damned. Eldritch's encounters with humanity became increasingly complex. Each visitor to his remote sanctuary brought news from the world below, tales of wars, plagues, and the church's rise to power, which hunted his kind relentlessly as abominations. Among his visitors was a lost spirit, a young maiden cursed to wander the earth in search of her betrayer. Her story of sorrow and betrayal resonated with Eldritch, and in her he saw the reflection of his own cursed fate. Their shared nights were filled with dark revelations and the unraveling of Eldritch's hardened heart. But as dawn approached, she faded into the mists, leaving Eldritch alone once more, with her whispers lingering like a mournful dirge. Her presence reminded him that the world was full of suffering, and perhaps, he pondered, there was a role for him, a reason for his eternal watch. Yet, fear of the vampire hunters, who had begun to scour the mountains for the legendary Shadow of the Carpathians, kept Eldritch from venturing too far from his fortress. He knew the church and its hunters were relentless and cruel, more concerned with eradication than understanding. Chapter 3. The Plague Bearer's Visit. As decades turned into centuries, the world outside continued to suffer. One autumn evening, as leaves died and fell from the trees like whispers of death, a figure, cloaked in black, approached Eldritch's castle. It was the Plague Bearer, a fellow immortal who thrived on the decay and destruction of plagues. He brought with him an offer: join him in spreading the Black Death, to revel in the chaos and the power it brought. Eldritch, disgusted yet fascinated, listened to the Plague Bearer's tales of cities overrun by disease, of civilizations on their knees, and of the dark joy he derived from such despair. The Plague Bearer's visit tested Eldritch's resolve like never before. Here was power, the ability to influence the world in profound and terrifying ways. Yet, the thought of such destruction repelled him, reminding him of the humanity he still clung to, despite his nature. Rejecting the Plague Bearer's offer, Eldritch chose a different path. He would not become a harbinger of death to the innocent. His rejection marked him as an enemy to the Plague Bearer, who vowed revenge as he disappeared into the foggy night, his laughter echoing like a curse. Chapter 4. The Siege of Shadows. The Plague Bearer's revenge was swift and brutal. He returned with a cadre of dark creatures and vampire hunters he had twisted to his will with promises of power. They laid siege to Eldritch's castle, a night of fire and blood. Eldritch, forced to defend his sanctuary, fought with a ferocity born of centuries of pent-up fury. The battle was grim, the castle halls echoing with the clash of steel and the screams of the fallen. Eldritch was a spectre of death, moving through the shadows, his heart aching with each life he took, even in defense of his own. As dawn approached and the attackers dwindled, Eldritch stood victorious yet hollow. The castle lay in ruins, a testament to the night's horrors. As he walked through the carnage, Eldritch realized that though he had chosen not to be the monster many believed him to be, the world would never understand or accept him. With the first light of dawn casting its judgmental gaze upon him, Eldritch vanished into the mists of the Carpathians once more, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his battle against both the darkness of the world and the darkness within himself was far from over. The world of man was no place for a creature like him, and his path of seclusion was perhaps, after all, his only sanctuary. Eldritch, Knights of the New Moon. Chapter 1. A shadow over Florence. Florence during the Renaissance was a mosaic of human genius. Artists like Michelangelo and thinkers like Machiavelli walked its bustling streets. Eldritch, the eternal observer, assumed the guise of a nobleman, Lorenzo di Alessandro. He sponsored artists and philosophers, subtly guiding them to ponder darker, more profound aspects of human nature in their works. As Florence thrived in daylight, its vibrant colors bled into dusk, where Eldritch's true form emerged under the cloak of night. However, the city's brilliance was marred by a series of gruesome deaths. Nobles found drained of blood in their locked chambers, with no signs of entry or struggle. Whispers of a Malocchio, evil eye, began to circulate among the populace, and Eldritch felt the weight of suspicion drawing uncomfortably close. Determined to protect the secrecy of his kind and maintain the sanctity of his haven, Eldritch decided to hunt the true perpetrator. Using his preternatural senses, he tracked subtle clues left behind at the crime scenes. Fragments of ancient Venetian lace, a rare pigment under the victim's fingernails. These clues were breadcrumbs leading him through the labyrinthine alleys of Florence, drawing him closer to a shadowy figure that seemed always one step ahead. Chapter 2. The Masked Ball. To flush out the killer, Eldritch hosted a grand masked ball under the guise of a feast celebrating Florence's cultural achievements. The city's elite, adorned in elaborate masks and gowns, unwittingly became pieces in his game of chess. Eldritch's eyes, however, were not on the revelers, but on the shadows that danced just beyond the candlelight. Midway through the evening, a masked figure in a cloak of midnight velvet caught his attention. The figure moved through the crowd, not partaking in the festivities, but observing, much like Eldritch himself. Following a hunch, Eldritch approached the figure, engaging them in a conversation laden with veiled threats and insights. The stranger, who introduced himself simply as Niccolo, parried Eldritch's words with a chilling grace, his knowledge of vampiric lore unsettlingly accurate. As the tension between the two escalated, a scream shattered the knight's facade. Another noble had been found, lifeless, in a pool of his own blood. The ball dissolved into chaos, and Niccolo vanished in the confusion, leaving Eldritch with more questions than answers. Chapter 3. The hunt intensifies. The city of Florence was now a tightening noose of paranoia and fear. The Signoria, Florence's governing authority, ordered the city's gates shut at sunset, and patrols were doubled. Eldritch, caught between his role as protector and suspect, intensified his own investigations, disguising his nightly pursuits as the machinations of a concerned noble. Eldritch delved deeper into Florence's underworld. He discovered that Niccolo was a member of an ancient and secretive faction of vampires known as the Crimson Cloak, which believed in ruling humanity openly from the shadows. Confronting Niccolo in the crypts beneath the Basilica di Santa Croce, where the air was thick with the musk of death and decay, Eldritch challenged him to forsake his bloody crusade. The confrontation was a clash of fangs and philosophies, with Eldritch defending the need to coexist secretly alongside humanity, while Niccolo argued for their supremacy. Chapter 4. Twilight of Fire. The struggle culminated in an intense battle that spilled from the shadowy crypts onto the moonlit streets of Florence. Eldritch, driven by a fierce desire to protect his adopted city, fought with a blend of ancient strength and centuries-honed strategy. As dawn approached, with the first rays of sunlight threatening to expose them both, Eldritch subdued Niccolo, binding him with chains forged from sacred relics. In the aftermath, as Florence awakened, unaware of the nocturnal battle, Eldritch delivered Niccolo to the elders of the Vampire Council, hidden deep in the Apennines. Justice for his crimes would be decided away from human eyes. Eldritch returned to Florence, his heart heavy with the knowledge of the continuous threat his kind posed to the world of men. As he watched the sun rise over the Duomo, painting the city in hues of gold and crimson, he realized that his fight was not just against those who had exposed them, but against the darkness within each vampire, including himself. Resuming his guise as Lorenzo, Eldritch continued to walk among the people of Florence, a silent guardian, veiled by the art and beauty of the Renaissance, forever watching, forever waiting, as the eternal dance between light and shadow played on.